Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, we're 2 years and 2 weeks since the referendum, and for the first time today, the government has agreed on its vision of Brexit. Now, this is not what we'll get, by the way. That'll depend on negotiation with the EU. No, what they signed up to at Chequers today was the British ask. We've had speeches, white and green papers, exchanges of views and agreement on some of the divorce arrangements, but it's taken this long for the government to say how we make our new trading relationship work in practical terms. Their idea is for the UK and EU to be a free trade area for goods, not services. That's agreed with the government intact.
Well, we've had good, in-depth, detailed discussions today. Crucially, what we have agreed is the creation of a UK-EU free trade area. This will maintain high standards. There will be a common rule book for industrial goods and agricultural products. But we also will ensure that nothing can change without the consent, without the approval of our Parliament.
Well, it's a complex plan, trying to satisfy everyone, allowing us to have our own trade deals, but keeping Airbus happy by not imposing new border controls. It's also driven by the need to prevent a physical border at either end of Northern Ireland. But is it the best or the worst of all worlds? Certainly it's a far softer Brexit than described in the referendum. Let's boil the government plan down. First, the incomprehensible idea for customs and tariffs, which will be collected at the border. It's called the Facilitated Customs Arrangement. It prevents any need for a new physical border with the EU, but for goods coming from elsewhere in the world, from China, say, we'd collect either our own tariffs or the EU tariffs if the products are moving on to the EU. And a tracking system would identify the destination of all but a handful of goods, allowing the right tariff to be charged when the goods arrive here. It's because we might have our own different tariffs to the EU, we can have our trade deals with other countries. That's one. The big concession today, though, is the second part, a common rule book for goods. Now, we agree to meet EU standards on goods and agricultural produce, so there is no need for a border post where goods are checked as they go past. No border, all nice and simple, but we end up as rule takers with no say on rules on anything, or well, we take rules on everything, from jams to jet engines. Well, there is more in the British plan. It'll all be published next week, but those 2 points, I think, are the most important. I'm joined by our political editor, Nick Watt. This is a big day, Nick. How would you characterise this deal?
Well, it is a very significant moment. The Prime Minister has essentially gone for the closest possible relationship with the European Union whilst remaining technically with her red lines. Now, we know what they were because we heard Boris Johnson outlining them at the beginning of the programme, the Brexit promises. So it's control of laws, control of borders, control of money and control of trade deals. But you drill down into the document you've had tonight, you do see a very significant role for the European Court of Justice. So I think it's fair to say that those red lines are being blurred. Now, we don't know what Cabinet Ministers think because they're only just beginning to leave today's meeting, but I do know that one senior Cabinet Minister who was very much on the Theresa May side, very happy in recent days, this Cabinet Minister has been telling Conservative MPs, just imagine if we put on the table what we have now, a £39 billion divorce bill, a transition period and this incredibly close trading relationship. If the Prime Minister had done that within 2 weeks of being Prime Minister, she would have been gone within 20 seconds.
I mean, it's amazing. So Brexit means Brexit, which means a facilitated customs arrangement and a rule taker on a big chunk of our economy. How come no Brexiteer walked out today?
Well, they appear to decided not to walk out. The same conclusion for different reasons. So the Michael Gove reason is you stay because what you've got to do is you make sure we leave the European Union in March, and at that point you can sort of argue about the details. You could change it in the future. The Boris Johnson view is you stay to fight now in the autumn because he believes when the European Union gives its response in October, there will be a very, very big battle. But deep unease and unhappiness amongst Brexiteers tonight, lots of conference calls. I was talking to one who described today's outlines of the deal as a bag of, and let's not repeat the word that this person said. A number of Brexiteers are saying to me they think this is going to look like a budget. Lovely warm glow for 48 hours, but this Brexiteer said by Monday night it'll be in trouble.
Interestingly, in a letter to Conservative MPs, the Prime Minister kind of reiterated that Cabinet are now, properly for the first time under her, absolutely expected to sign up to the programme.
Well, it turns out that the Prime Minister never sort of reinstated Cabinet collective responsibility on Europe after David Cameron lifted it. Clear message tonight, that is back in force, so watch out, Boris Johnson.
Right, you can't complain. We should, of course, say, missing from the room today, the EU. A lot of this we just know is not up their street at all.
Well, Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator, has this evening initially given the response that the Prime Minister would like. He welcomes it. He's going to wait to look at the white paper. But the EU is very, very sceptical. They believe that the UK is trying to find a way into the single market through the back door.
Nick, thank you very much. Well, joining me now are two Conservative MPs from either side of the Brexit divide. They're Bill Cash, a veteran leaver who's chair of Parliament's European Scrutiny Committee. First, let's talk to Dominic Grieve, though, a Remain supporter who has led, of course, rebellions over the EU withdrawal bill. Dominic Grieve, in 10 days, there'll be a vote on the trade bill, and some of you guys were planning an amendment to say we have to be in a customs union. Does that stand now, or does that go?
We'll be looking at the white paper and considering very carefully what the government's statement and position is. We've always said that if the government can achieve the same result as being in a customs union through negotiation by another means, then that would be a possibility.
And so you're open to this being that, meeting your kind of...
Always open to giving this consideration, because clearly the more leeway the government can keep for itself, the better. The real key thing here is the final recognition that our businesses require frictionless trade. That has always been the centrepiece of everything I've been saying, and my colleagues, who I think share my views, have been saying. And frictionless trade requires accepting that we're going to follow EU rules, because they are the people with whom we want to do the frictionless trade. It's essential for our economic well-being.
Following rules is what today's big news is. We're following the rules. Do you think the public would have voted for this deal if this had been a specific deal on offer at the time of the referendum?
I've no idea, because the difficulty was always that the public were asked to carry out an abstract decision. Right. And they gave an abstract answer, which has since been interpreted by large numbers of people in different ways. We can only go on what the public said, which is that they said they wanted to leave the EU.
And is this consistent with that? As far as you're concerned,
clearly consistent.
Because there are going to be some people saying it's not. This is not.
The idea that one is going to escape the impact of a court like the Court of the European Court of Justice regulating trade with a group of countries with whom you wish to do trade has always been fanciful. And if that was put over by leavers during the referendum campaign, then they were misleading themselves and misleading others.
Right. Interesting thing now, though, of course, is that we know that this is really the beginning of the process of negotiation with the EU. This isn't our last offer, is it? I think this is our kind of... Here, this is what we're thinking.
There are two parties to this. Right, the EU have got to be persuaded of that in fact, what we're asking them is possible for them within the framework of maintaining their own cohesion. And that is clearly going to be a very important discussion.
And if the government says, we're not going to budge, this is it, this is our last word on this, it's this or no deal, and if we're heading to no deal, because the EU says, no, this is not good enough for us, what do you guys do then?
My view has always been that a no-deal outcome would be catastrophic for everybody's well-being in this country. It really would be. It would be a great disaster. And as a parliamentarian, I wouldn't be prepared just to allow us to coast into that disaster without taking action.
So you would rebel if that...
Oh, I undoubtedly would, yes.
OK, let me turn to Sir Bill Cash. What do you think?
Well, first of all, we've got to see the white paper. Secondly, there are some tests. Wait, yes, you do. No, there are some very important questions that have been raised by the statement that the government's just put out. In particular, for example, does it meet the test of the referendum itself? Dominic says that it's a question of abstract questioning and abstract answers. No, it's not. It's do you leave or do you remain?
We leave.
And
do you disagree with Dominic that this is leaving the
I'm
EU?
saying it's not abstract. I'm saying it's real. Okay. And I'm also saying that the Repeal Act, which went through 2 weeks ago, actually quite specifically says the 1972 Act will be repealed on exit day. Right. Now, when it does that, wait a minute, when it does that, it quite clearly also says that you can't stay in the single market, you can't stay in the customs union, you can't stay in the European Court.
She says formally we're not saying in any of these
No, I
things.
know, but
that's
what's become rather disturbing. And we have a lot of...
Will you vote for this deal? I'm trying to get... Because my feeling is that you're very unhappy about it.
Well, you could say that I was deeply disappointed, to say the least. And what I can say is that when you talk about harmonisation of rules, when you talk about the jurisdiction of the European Court, actually, you're raising some very, very difficult questions in relation to that Repeal Act. As I said to the House of Commons this week, that is the law of the land.
No, you pass another act. Come on, you just pass another act.
Well, I'm afraid that is not the way we see it. But quite frankly, there are as many questions being raised in this statement and this meeting as we'll expect to have answers to in the next few days.
Isn't this a case? She strung you along. You're a frog, and you've been sitting in a pan, and she has boiled you, and at no point have you felt it hot enough to jump out. And now it's too late for you to do anything about it. You've no options.
Now, Evan, I remind you about what happened with Jeremy Fisher, and he got away from the pike. So watch out for that one. The analogy is not good because actually we've got that Repeal Act through, the Withdrawal Act, and that really, really is the law of the land, and it's quite clear. And will the EU even accept the outcome of all this? That's the other question, because I have very grave doubts as to whether or not, given what we call the acquis, that's the body of European law, that they actually will ever allow the single market to be fragmented. Because that's what this does.
Everybody thinks that. So what does the government do when the EU say, look, actually, you've got to have more ECJ and you've probably got to have more free movement than
that is the reason that I'm raising these questions, to which there are no straightforward answers as yet. But actually, there are very important issues of principle which go straight back to the referendum and the passing of that Withdrawal Act.
Do you not think it's legitimate for the people to have another thought, to think again on this? Now we know, not what the EU will give us, now we know what we are asking for, so what we think Brexit means.
Well, I don't...
And we've seen that it means a rule taker in which, for a huge chunk of our economy, we simply, by fax or whatever means, do what they say, give up any say in those rules ourselves. Yeah. Does that to you seem like what was kind of
And also,
offered?
if I may say, as Chairman of the European Scrutiny Committee, the question of how the Council of Ministers actually arrives at those rules, which is behind closed doors, actually by consensus, where Britain is outvoted more often than any other country, and then they're imposed upon us. And without any transcript of the proceedings. That's why we had to get out. We got out in the nick of time. But the reality is that this does raise some very, very important questions. We should be looking at this in the European Scrutiny Committee and in Parliament very carefully indeed. There are some aspects of it which do fit into the red lines, but there are many others which raise a lot of very serious questions.
Really going to be interesting to see how this pans out. Thank you both very much. Well, the announcement of Cabinet Peace in Our Time came at about 9 p.m. There was quick reaction. Journalists who had advance notice of what was coming had time to prepare. Others had to scramble. On Twitter, the CBI welcomed the deal. This is a genuine confidence boost, and Number 10 deserves credit, they said. Quentin Letts of the Daily Mail, a more ominous sign for the Prime Minister. He says Mrs May's wetness on Brexit is dreary and defeatist. Well, let us now reflect on what this British proposal means for the Brexit, the government, the public. We're joined by the columnist for The Times, Jenny Russell, senior editor at The Economist, Dan McElvoy, and broadcaster Ian Dale. Well, what a day. Ian, you must be... It's not... You are of our sort of panellists, always the most keen Brexiteer.
Well, this is Brexit in name only, isn't it? It's as simple as that. And I think I've obviously looked on Twitter tonight and seen the reaction of a lot of Tories, ordinary Tory party members, and that loud sound you hear in the background is of them ripping their membership cards up. They're not impressed by this. This is the one outcome that I just couldn't foresee happening. I couldn't see how she could get...
that we might have to compromise along the way.
No, not at all. Not at all. I do believe we have to compromise, but I didn't see her being able to get the cabinet on side. And they've all blinked, and I'm really shocked at that in some ways.
You think they're a bit spineless, basically?
Well, let's see, because they could all be getting their ministerial cars home and then resigning in the morning, I suppose. But, I mean, the European Union reaction to this is going to be fascinating, because what I predict is that they will commit now, and when the white paper comes, they'll say, well, we can't do that, we can't do that, and they'll bide their time until October. And this is
have to make another
postponing the inevitable.
Okay. Let me ask the other, because I'm interested in whether you two think this is a genius compromise, or whether it's too clever by half, or whether it's just kicking the can. Go on, Anne.
I think it's the only compromise that she could really hope to win at this stage. It's a risk for all the reasons that Ian has laid out. I mean, it was a bit like, if people remember the Stephen King novel Misery, where, you know, you kind of lock up your victim and just don't let them out until they've sort of, you know, the worst has happened. Well, from the Brexiteer perspective, the worst has happened. But it's not over for the Brexiteers, because when the white paper is published, or when this runs into trouble, because it's a rather complex idea and it's a bit of a fudge on many scores, they could just say, look, we don't accept this, we're going to walk out. But I think for now, she has basically looked them in the eyes and they have blinked. And that actually, given the hand that Theresa May has had over the last 2 years, which has not been an easy one to play, she sometimes looked like she was slow-footed.
No, I mean, suddenly she looks like she has...
And now she's saying collective responsibility.
Yeah,
so, you know,
authority restored somehow.
I think that's quite clever, actually, because that might trigger resignations just on those grounds alone.
Jenny, do you think it's a masterstroke or a bit of a disaster today?
I think it's the Brexiteers being mugged by reality, and the Prime Minister finally being able to convince them that here we are, 2.5 years after the campaign began. Is there a Brexiteer plan? Have they got any good idea about how to preserve the economy, or keep jobs in Britain, or handle a relationship with Britain that isn't disastrous? No, they haven't come up with a single alternative plan. So that when she says today, this is it, this is what we're going to try and ask for from Brussels, two things happen. A, they know that they can't get any of their wilder demands through, because Brussels will never say yes to them. Secondly, they've learnt to count. They've looked both at the Cabinet and at the Commons, and they know that there is no majority for their kind of hard Brexit. If they could have dislodged May today, if they had thought that resigning would get them anywhere, they would have done so. But this is a bunch of people who've been practising cake and eat it and promising unicorns now for more than 2 years. None of it has any basis in reality. Business has finally found its voice and come out and said, hang on a minute, we're going to lose, in the last few days, we're going to lose a lot of very highly paid
let's
jobs.
put this to Ian, because Ian, this is your problem as a Brexiteer.
It's not my problem, it's their problem.
No, but it's there, but it's your side's problem. You have no options. You don't have the numbers in the Commons, but you also don't have a plan. Your plan is just to say no deal,
well,
and that's no transition.
It's not my plan. I've been extremely critical of what the government have been doing over the last few weeks. I think it's been shambolic.
What's Boris's plan?
I'd love to know what Boris's plan is, apart from the plans for his own career.
But maybe there is no plan. Maybe there isn't a plan to be had that delivers what you want.
I think there have been plans, and they've all been nixed by Ollie Robbins, who seems to me that the Prime Minister has been taken hostage by Ollie Robbins. It's a sort of Stockholm syndrome. It is misery all over again. And I'm afraid that David Davis has either allowed that to happen or been unable to prevent it from happening.
I think this is a bit of impossibilism. I mean, there's always this perfect Brexit which can never be found because somebody has betrayed it or someone hasn't, you know, done the right thing. But I think the solution really lies in Berlin, not in Brussels anyway. And I think if you look at Theresa May going off to see, you know, Angela Merkel...
And disgracefully showing her this document before the Cabinet.
I disagree with that, because I think that was really, if this is to have any chance of working in any form, and I'm not as pessimistic, that, you know, Brussels, we've seen a better tone from Barnier in the last few days as chief negotiator. We've seen at some point Angela Merkel, who has an awful lot on her plate, might just want it off the to-do list. So there is always a process, and this is why I always think, you know, whether one goes with you're an absolutely paid-up Remainer or whether you're a Brexiteer, the thing about Europe is there is always a process, and you have to just do the best.
There's
always a compromise to be done.
Can I say that I think that you're being much too kind to your side. If unsurprisingly,
oh my goodness.
Has Boris Johnson ever sat back when he could come forward? If Boris Johnson had anything useful to say on this issue, he would have come out with a plan. He doesn't have a plan. He's a man of hidden shallows rather than a man of hidden depth.
Boris Johnson, I wouldn't come out. I would wait and resign later.
No one's going to follow him. He's a busted flush. But the point is, so the Brexiteers, let's get rid of the idea that Ollie Robbins has stamped on some brilliant plan of the Brexiteers. They have no plan.
It's not a brilliant plan. It's a terrible plan. That's the problem.
Whatever their plans are, they have been shown to be either ridiculous or non-existent, and that is their problem. They haven't got any alternatives to offer. But the point is, too, is that Brussels reaction here is key, but I think that they are going to take their lead from May. They're going to think, thank God, at last, the Brits are just about 2 years too late, starting to come up with some point, which actually they should have come up with,
which is very far away from Brexit.
Yeah. But it would have been a good idea if they had come up with this before Article 50, and Brussels will now welcome it politely. Then they will start nudging away at the edges, and basically they will go through the same process that May has had to go through with her cabinet.
But
at last, there's hope on the horizon.
What I do want to get to, though, is where do we think the public will land on this? Will the public think, Theresa May, awfully difficult job. She's done her best, bless, and you know, we follow her. Or will they say this is a betrayal of what 17.4 million voted?
Let me tell you what.
He's letting me tell you.
I will tell you what the public. I will tell you what the public think, because I speak to them for 3 hours every day on the radio.
Not exactly a representative sample.
Well, believe me, I think they probably are, and a lot of them are saying, if she doesn't go through with a realistic Brexit, not a Brexit in name only, many of us will not only never vote Conservative again, will never vote again. Right. And that's a problem that 17.4 million people, or many of them, are going to feel betrayed.
Is that
by
your
this.
take?
No, it isn't. I think some people will feel betrayed. I mean, some of the country's going to feel betrayed. You've got 48% people are not going to be happy. People will often use the word never, and I don't believe in the word never in this debate. I think actually, Theresa May, looking a bit like sort of Gareth Southgate, just plans.
Someone had to make that announcement.
Someone had to make.
Well, at least he's shown leadership.
Hang on, she showed leadership too. You don't like the way she led, but she did show leadership.
It's following Ollie Robbins. That's what she's done. That's not leadership.
Well, she chooses who she follows. She doesn't have to do that. So I think the public, to an extent, will give her the benefit of the doubt.
Most people are not following this in any degree whatsoever. It's going straight over their heads, quite understandably, because it's become so detailed and so obscure. But what people wanted from Brexit was, A, that we should leave, which I think is a mistake, but it looks as if we are going to be doing that. But secondly, they wanted better lives. They wanted more prosperity. They want jobs. They want futures for their children. They want all those things which made them so dissatisfied with politics in the first place. And what they don't want is an economy that's diving. And if they hear that we are leaving the European Union, but they're still keeping their jobs, I think people will be remarkably...
They'll be sanguine about it.
Sanguine,
Ian,
exactly.
last question. Will you keep your membership of the Conservative Party?
I haven't been a member of the Conservative Party since 2010.
Will you remain a supporter of the Conservative Party?
In the local elections, I voted Liberal Democrat.
You're a very complicated person, Ian.
Well, look, I judge things on their merits.
Right.
The last election, I did vote Conservative. Right. And given the choice between Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn, I think you probably can guess which side I would go down. But I'm not a member of the Conservative Party.
Lot to play for. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.